I remember the smell of sanctified oils burning when I first witnessed the binding ritual. My name is Interrogator Vex Kallos, former Ordo Malleus, current penitent exile. I helped create 17 daemonhosts during my service to the Inquisition. You think that makes me a monster, but you don't know what I've seen. Death is a mercy the Imperium grants to heretics and traitors, but some souls are too valuable to waste, too dangerous to kill, and too corrupt to redeem. These become daemonhosts, living prisons where human consciousness is trapped forever with a demon, experiencing every moment of violation, every act of malice, every sin committed in their stolen flesh. The Inquisition taught me that some fates transcend death itself. After my 17th binding, when I watched Missionary Hadrien's eyes plead for death while his mouth spoke words of pure evil, I finally understood the true horror. Chapter 1. The Faithful Servant. Before I understood what damnation truly meant, I served the Emperor with absolute faith. Interrogator Kallos, they called me then. Never Vex, never the familiar address reserved for friends. The Ordo Malleus had no room for friendship, only duty and the endless war against chaos. My quarters aboard the strike cruiser. Unrelenting truth was Spartanly furnished. A cot, a writing desk, shelves lined with treatises on demon lore, and a single picked capture of my homeworld Valhalla before the ice storms claimed it. The morning routine never varied. Prayers at 0500, combat training at 0600, tactical briefings at 0800, field operations until the Emperor demanded otherwise. Inquisitor Mordian Thrace commanded our retinue with the cold precision of a lascalpel. Where other Inquisitors might rely on theatrics or intimidation, Thrace simply stated facts. 73% of possessed individuals retain some fragment of consciousness during the initial binding, he would say, reviewing casualty reports over recaf. This percentage increases to 91% when the subject possesses psychic potential. I recorded everything in my personal logs, believing knowledge would shield me from the horrors we faced. Each mission followed established protocols: identify the threat, isolate the contamination, apply the Emperor's justice. Simple, clean, necessary. The first time I witnessed a standard exorcism, I felt nothing but professional satisfaction. Brother Captain Varius of the Grey Knights had cornered a possessed cultist in the underhive of Krieg Secundus. The demons screaming as it was banished back to the warp seemed like justice to me then. Another victory for humanity against the eternal darkness. Interrogator Kallos, Inquisitor Thrace said after the mission. What did you observe during the exorcism? The demon offered resistance consistent with a third circle entity, my lord. Brother Captain Varius executed the banishment with textbook precision. The host expired during the purging process, as expected. Thrace nodded approvingly. And what of the human component? The question puzzled me. The heretic was cleansed of taint, Inquisitor. His soul now rests with the Emperor. Indeed, Thrace's augmetic eye whirred softly as it focused on me. But tell me, Interrogator, did you hear the cultist's final words? I consulted my data slate, reviewing the audio logs. He said, "Thank you, my lord, finally. Thank you. Gratitude for death, Kallos. Remember that sentiment. You will encounter it again." At the time, I interpreted this as another theological lesson about redemption through martyrdom. The Imperial Creed taught that death in service to the Emperor was the highest honor a mortal could achieve. Why wouldn't a purged heretic express gratitude for his soul's liberation? Our missions across the Cadian Gate region exposed me to corruption in all its forms. Chaos cults worshipping the ruinous powers through blood sacrifice and ritual mutilation. Plague zombies spreading Nurgle's gifts through habblocks and hive cities. Tzeentchian conspiracies that had infiltrated planetary governments and corrupted entire bureaucracies. Each victory felt meaningful. Each purged heretic represented another small triumph in humanity's eternal struggle for survival. I began to understand why Inquisitor Thrace had selected me for his retinue. My analytical mind processed horror clinically, without the emotional breakdown that claimed lesser agents. You possess a remarkable quality, Interrogator, Thrace observed during one of our evening strategy sessions. Most humans recoil from the truths we uncover. You embrace them. Knowledge is power, my lord. The Emperor protects those who understand their enemies. Yes, but understanding and wisdom are different things entirely. Tell me, what do you believe happens to a demon when it is banished? I recited the orthodox position. The entity returns to the warp, where it remains until summoned again or destroyed by rival powers. Correct. And the human host dies, typically. The strain of possession usually proves fatal during exorcism. Thrace activated a holo projector, displaying tactical data from our recent missions. Red icons marked confirmed demon manifestations across 17 systems. Observe the pattern, Kallos. We have banished 37 entities in the past 6 months. 14 have already returned, manifesting in new hosts within the same operational theater. The implication was obvious. We're fighting the same enemies repeatedly, sir. Precisely. Each banishment is temporary. Each exorcism merely postpones the inevitable confrontation. Thrace's expression grew thoughtful. What if I told you there was a way to make these victories permanent? My pulse quickened. The possibility of truly defeating chaos entities rather than simply delaying them represented a breakthrough that could save millions of Imperial lives. I would say such knowledge would be invaluable to the Ordo Malleus, Inquisitor. Indeed, but permanence requires compromise. The demon cannot be banished if it has nowhere to go. I frowned, processing the theological implications. Surely you're not suggesting we allow possessions to continue, my lord. Not allow, Kallos. Control. Bind. Imprison. Thrace's augmetic eye cast a crimson glow across the tactical display. What if the human host could be preserved, maintaining consciousness while the demon remains trapped within? What if we could create weapons from our enemies, servants who possess demonic power but remain loyal to the Emperor? The concept was breathtaking in its audacity. Rather than simply destroying chaos entities, we could turn their own strength against them. Is such a thing possible, Inquisitor? Possible, necessary, and absolutely heretical by orthodox standards. Thrace deactivated the holo display. The Ordo Malleus has been developing these techniques for centuries, Kallos. We call them daemonhosts, humans who successfully bind and control demonic entities through a combination of psychic conditioning, ritual preparation, and pure will. Volunteers, sir. Thrace's laugh held no humor. Rarely, most subjects are drawn from condemned prisoners, captured psychers, or heretics, whose knowledge proves too valuable to waste through simple execution. The binding process requires specific psychological profiles, individuals with sufficient mental resilience to maintain consciousness during possession. I felt the first stirring of unease. And afterward, what becomes of these demon hosts? They serve the Inquisition until their deaths, which typically occurs within several years due to the physical strain. But during their service, they provide us with capabilities no standard agent could match: psychic powers, inhuman strength, immunity to many forms of attack, and knowledge drawn directly from the warp itself. The tactical advantages were undeniable. A single demon host could accomplish missions that might require entire squads of Astartes or guard regiments. But something in Thrace's tone suggested complications he had not yet revealed. Sir, you mentioned that the subjects maintain consciousness during the binding. Yes, Kallos, that is perhaps the most crucial aspect of the process. A mindless host provides no control over the demon. The human consciousness must remain intact, aware, and resistant to prevent the entity from achieving complete dominance. I began to understand the true nature of what Thrace was describing. These weren't simply weapons or tools. They were human beings transformed into living prisons, forever locked in mental combat with entities of pure malevolence. Tomorrow, Thrace said, rising from his chair, you will observe your first binding ritual. Prepare yourself, Interrogator. What you witness may challenge everything you believe about mercy, justice, and the Emperor's will. That night, I lay awake in my Spartan quarters, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile orthodox imperial doctrine with the reality of what Thrace had revealed. The Emperor protected humanity from chaos, but perhaps protection sometimes required methods that seemed indistinguishable from the very evil we fought against. I told myself that understanding would bring clarity. I was wrong. Chapter 2. First Whispers. The binding chamber aboard the Unrelenting Truth existed in a part of the ship that no standard crew member ever visited. Located 3 decks below the main chapel, behind blast doors marked with every ward and prayer seal known to the ecclesiarchy, it represented everything the Imperium officially denied existed. I followed Inquisitor Thrace through corridors lined with hexagrammatic wards carved directly into the adamantium hull. The temperature dropped noticeably as we descended, and the ever-present hum of the ship's systems seemed muffled, as if the very air had grown thick with suppressed malevolence. First rule, Interrogator, Thrace said without looking back. What you witness here never happened. No records exist, no reports will be filed, no confessions will be made. The Ordo Malleus operates in the spaces between official doctrine and necessary action. Understood, sir. Second rule, do not interfere, regardless of what you observe. The binding process is delicate. Disruption could result in full demonic manifestation, which would require us to destroy both subject and daemon through more conventional means. We passed through 3 separate checkpoint stations, each manned by servo skulls, equipped with Auspex arrays, calibrated to detect warp disturbances. The final blast door required Thrace's personal authorization, a blood sample, and a recitation of prayers in languages that predated the formation of the Imperium. The binding chamber itself defied every expectation I had formed. Rather than the crude torture chamber I had imagined, the space resembled a medical facility crossed with a monastery's inner sanctum. Banks of monitoring equipment lined the walls alongside altars dedicated to the Emperor's various aspects. The floor was inscribed with a perfect circle of silver, within which geometric patterns formed a binding matrix more complex than anything I had encountered in my studies. At the chamber's center stood an examination table equipped with restraint systems that appeared both medical and ritualistic in nature. Surrounding it were 4 positions marked for observers, each protected by individual ward circles and equipped with emergency banishment equipment. The subject arrives in 10 minutes, Thrace informed me, checking chronometer readings on his data slate. I want you to observe everything, but speak only if directly addressed. The daemon will attempt to use any available distraction to break free during the binding process. What should I expect, Inquisitor? Pain, terror, blasphemy. The daemon will say things designed to disturb your faith and shake your resolve. It will claim knowledge of your past, your fears, your secret doubts. None of it matters. Focus on the process itself. A soft chime indicated the arrival of our subject. The chamber's secondary entrance opened to admit a procession that would have seemed sacred in any other context. Tech priest Dominus Valen led the way, his augmetic limbs moving with perfect mechanical precision as he activated the various monitoring systems. Behind him came a pair of crusaders bearing blessed weapons, their presence necessary should the binding fail catastrophically. Between them walked the subject, and I felt my first shock of recognition. Missionary Hadrien of the Adeptus Ministorum. I had read his file during our voyage to the Ophelia system, where we had investigated reports of demon activity in the Cathedral District. Hadrien had served the Emperor faithfully for 37 years, bringing the Imperial Creed to feral worlds and fighting alongside guard regiments during the 13th Black Crusade. He was also, according to our investigation, the unwitting host to a demon of Tzinch that had been influencing his sermons for the past 6 months. The irony was as perfect as it was horrifying. A man who had spent his life preaching the Emperor's protection from chaos was about to become a weapon forged from the very evil he had fought against. Missionary Hadrien, Thrace said formally. You understand why you are here? The older man nodded slowly. His eyes held the hollow look of someone who had already accepted his fate. But I noticed his hands trembling slightly as the Crusaders guided him to the examination table. I feel it moving inside my thoughts, Inquisitor. The whispers grow stronger each day, and you understand the choice before you. Death through exorcism, or service through binding. Hadrian's voice carried no trace of the passionate oratory that had brought thousands into the Emperor's light. You've explained the odds, my lord. 93% mortality rate for exorcism of a greater demon. The entity would simply return to plague other servants of the throne, while binding offers a 74% chance of successful control, Thrace continued. Your consciousness would be preserved, and the demon would be imprisoned indefinitely. I watched Hadrian's face as he considered this. The mathematics were clear. Binding offered better survival odds while preventing the demon's return. But I was beginning to understand that survival and mercy were not synonymous. Will I still be myself? Hadrian asked. Tech Priest Valen's Vox unit crackled to life. Consciousness retention rate approaches 91% in subjects of your psychological profile, missionary. However, the degree of control over physical actions varies significantly based on individual willpower and the strength of the bound entity. Thrace shot Valen a warning look. Too much information could cause the subject to refuse cooperation, which would force them to proceed without consent, a factor that significantly reduced binding success rates. You will remain aware, Thrace said carefully. The demon cannot access your memories or thoughts without your knowledge. You will know when it acts through your body. What he didn't say, what I would later learn through direct observation, was that knowing and preventing were entirely different things. The binding ritual itself began with deceptive simplicity. Hadrian lay upon the examination table, while Valen attached monitoring cables to various points on his skull, chest, and wrists. The readings immediately showed the demon's presence. Brain activity spiked in patterns no human neural system could generate naturally. Beginning invocation sequence, Thrace announced, producing a ritual dagger inscribed with verses from the Lectitio Divinitatus. Tech Priest Valen, monitor for warp disturbances. Crusaders, maintain overwatch position. The first cut across Hadrian's palm drew blood that hissed when it touched the silver binding circle. The second cut across his forehead produced a reaction I had not expected. The missionary's eyes rolled back until only white showed, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made my bones ache. Foolish mortals, you think to cage the infinite. I am Vexthara, the changing way, and I have existed since before your pathetic star was born. Thrace continued the ritual without pause, his voice rising to match the demon's volume. By the authority of the Golden Throne, by the will of the Emperor, by the power of the faithful, I bind thee to this flesh and bone. I will wear his skin like a glove, Inquisitor. Through his mouth I will speak lies that damn thousands. Through his hands I will corrupt everything he once held sacred. The temperature in the chamber plummeted. Frost formed on the monitoring equipment despite the artificial heat. Valen's readings showed neural activity levels that should have killed any baseline human instantly. But Hadrian was still alive, still conscious, and I realized with growing horror that he could hear every word the demon spoke through his own mouth. The binding holds, Valen reported, his mechanical voice cutting through the demon's continued threats. Subject consciousness remains distinct from entity influence. Continue the ritual, Thrace ordered. What followed next haunts me still. As Thrace spoke the words of binding, I watched Hadrian's face shift between expressions of pure terror and absolute malevolence. His own consciousness would surface briefly, eyes wide with fear, mouth moving silently in prayer, before the demon reasserted control, twisting his features into expressions of contempt and hunger. The worst part was the recognition in Hadrian's eyes during his moments of control. He knew exactly what was happening to him. He understood that he would be forever locked in mental combat with an entity of pure evil, unable to control his own actions, forced to experience every atrocity committed in his name. And still he did not ask them to stop. 27 minutes after it began, the binding ritual concluded. The silver circle's glow faded. The temperature returned to normal. Valen's monitoring equipment showed stable readings for both human and demonic consciousness. "Rise, Daemonhost," Thrace commanded. The thing that had been Missionary Hadrien sat up slowly. When it looked at me, I saw two distinct entities looking out through the same eyes, one pleading for death, the other promising eternal torment. Chapter 3. The Binding Chamber. The Daemonhost that had been Missionary Hadrien stood at attention in the observation chamber. Perfectly motionless for the entire hour, I watched him through the one-way armor glass. His breathing was regular, his posture military straight, but his eyes never stopped moving, darting left and right as if following the movement of things only he could see. Fascinating, isn't it? Inquisitor Thrace joined me at the observation window, data slate in hand. 63 hours post-binding, and both consciousnesses remain distinct. Most subjects achieve some form of mental equilibrium by now. I studied the readings on Thrace's slate. Neural activity in the Daemonhost showed two separate patterns oscillating at different frequencies, one recognizably human, the other following geometries that hurt to contemplate. Is the continued separation a positive development, sir? Unknown. Previous subjects who maintained distinct consciousness for extended periods showed either exceptional control or total breakdown. We'll know which category Hadrien falls into when we begin active testing. Active testing. The clinical terminology didn't disguise what Thrace meant, forcing the Daemonhost to use demonic abilities while his human consciousness remained aware of every blasphemy committed in his name. A soft chime indicated the arrival of our testing personnel. Tech priest Dominus Valen entered first, his servo skulls already running preliminary auspex scans on the Daemonhost. Behind him came a figure I hadn't expected. Interrogator Kylan Morse, a peer from my own graduating class at the Schola Progenium. "Kylan!" I called out as he passed through the chamber's security checkpoint. He turned, and I immediately noticed changes that 3 years of Inquisition service had wrought. His left arm had been replaced with an augmetic limb after an encounter with Chaos cultists on Meridian 4. Scars from ritual markings covered the visible portions of his neck and hands, evidence of deep cover work in heretical cults. But it was his eyes that disturbed me most. They held the same hollow quality I had seen in the Daemonhost. "Vex," he said, using my given name with tired familiarity. "Thrace finally brought you into the inner circle. How was your first binding?" The casual way he referred to the ritual suggested extensive experience. "You've observed these procedures before?" "Observed? I've conducted 12 bindings personally, 3 successful, 9 terminal failures." Killen's augmetic hand flexed unconsciously. "The failures are educational. Success is something else entirely." Before I could ask what he meant, Thrace called us to attention. "Gentlemen, we're beginning Hadrien's initial capability assessment. Interrogator Morse will serve as primary handler, given his experience with Daemonhost operations." Primary handler, another clinical term for what I was beginning to understand, was a form of psychological torment refined to an art. The testing protocol began simply enough. Valen established baseline readings while Kylan addressed the Daemonhost directly through the chamber's communication system. "State your name and status," Kylan ordered. "I am Missionary Hadrien of the Adeptus Ministorum." The response came in Hadrien's voice, but I noticed his hands trembling slightly. "I serve the Emperor's will through blessed union with his divine essence." The demon was speaking, using language that would sound orthodox to casual listeners, while meaning something entirely different to those who understood the truth. Blessed union with divine essence was a perfect description of demonic possession from the entity's perspective. "Demonstrate your enhanced capabilities," Kylan continued. What happened next defied every law of physics I thought I understood. The Daemonhost raised his right hand, and the air around his fingers began to shimmer. Colors that had no names in any human language rippled through the observation chamber, and I felt reality itself shifting like cloth in a wind. A steel plate that Valen had placed on the chamber floor began to transform. Its molecular structure rewrote itself at the Daemonhost's will, steel becoming gold, then crystal, then something that existed in too many dimensions for my eyes to properly process. Impressive control, Thrace murmured, making notes on his data slate. The Tzinchian influence provides significant matter manipulation abilities, but I wasn't watching the transformed steel. I was watching Hadrien's face during the demonstration. For brief moments, his human consciousness surfaced, and the expression of absolute horror in his eyes told me everything I needed to know about the Daemonhost experience. He was fully aware. He could feel the daemon's power flowing through his body, could sense the warp energies that violated every natural law. Most importantly, he understood that he was the conduit for blasphemies that would damn his soul in the Emperor's sight, if he still possessed a soul after the binding. Next test, Keelan announced. Psychic resistance. Valen activated a device I didn't recognize, a pyramidal construct covered in rotating rings of blessed silver. Immediately, the chamber filled with a psychic pressure that made my teeth ache. The device was generating a field designed to cause pain in any psyker or warp-touched individual. The Daemonhost screamed. The sound that came from Hadrien's throat contained harmonics that no human vocal cords could produce. It was a symphony of agony that spoke directly to the primitive parts of my brain, triggering every instinct that warned of predators and dark places. But underneath the demon's shriek of pain, I heard something worse. Hadrien's human voice, crying out in exactly the same agony. The psychic field was torturing both consciousnesses simultaneously. Excellent response, Thrace noted clinically. Both human and demonic components show equal sensitivity. This suggests successful binding integration rather than simple possession. Equal sensitivity. The daemon and the human were experiencing identical torture, locked together in a prison of shared suffering. Sir, I interrupted, is the psychic field necessary for testing? Thrace looked at me with surprise. Of course, Interrogator. We must understand the Daemonhost's vulnerabilities as well as its capabilities. Knowledge of its pain responses may prove crucial during field operations. Field operations. The Daemonhost would be sent on missions where enemies might use similar psychic attacks. Hadrien would experience this agony repeatedly, knowing that his own suffering was considered an acceptable tactical consideration. How long do these tests typically continue? I asked. Until we achieve comprehensive understanding, Thrace replied. Usually 3 to 4 weeks for initial evaluation, followed by monthly assessments throughout the Daemonhost's active service period. The testing continued for 6 hours. I watched as the Daemonhost was subjected to blessed weapons that burned its flesh, holy water that raised steam from its skin, and recordings of imperial hymns that caused visible physical distress. Each test served a tactical purpose. Understanding the Daemonhost's limitations would prevent mission failures. But I began to understand that the testing served another purpose Thrace hadn't mentioned. It was conditioning. Each session taught both the demon and the human consciousness that resistance brought pain, while cooperation brought relief. The Inquisition was training the Daemonhost to submit through carefully applied torture. During a brief break in the proceedings, I approached Kylan privately. How do you do it? I asked quietly. How do you conduct these sessions knowing what the human host experiences? Kylan's scarred face showed no emotion. The same way I do everything else in service to the throne, Vex. I remember that our enemies don't offer their victims the luxury of maintaining consciousness during torture. We're more merciful than chaos. Merciful? Hadrien volunteered for binding rather than exorcism. He chose extended service over probable death. The fact that service involves suffering doesn't change the mathematics of the decision. I stared through the armor glass at the Daemonhost, who had resumed his motionless stance. His eyes were still moving, tracking invisible movement, and I realized he was watching the demon's visual hallucinations while simultaneously experiencing his own human thoughts. Kylan, how many Daemonhosts have you worked with over 3 years? 17 initial bindings, 5 long-term subjects, 2 permanent assignments to other Inquisitors. He paused, and for a moment his clinical mask slipped. 3 requested termination after achieving full psychological integration. Requested termination? Some subjects eventually reach a point where the human consciousness can no longer maintain separation from the demon. They become aware that they're losing the internal battle piece by piece. Rather than risk full possession, they request final rites. The implications hit me like a physical blow. The daemonhosts weren't permanent solutions. They were temporary measures that ended either in death or damnation. The best possible outcome was eventual madness, followed by execution. Does Hadrien know this? They all know, Vex. It's part of the informed consent process. Killen's augmetic hand clenched into a fist. They choose binding because it offers months or years of meaningful service before the inevitable end. Most consider it a fair trade. I looked again at the daemonhost, trying to imagine the mental calculations that would make eternal internal warfare seem preferable to clean death. But then, I remembered Hadrien's file. 37 years of faithful service, thousands of souls brought into the Emperor's light, entire guard regiments inspired by his sermons. For someone like that, the chance to continue serving the throne, even under conditions that defied every human understanding of mercy, might indeed seem like a blessing rather than a curse. The testing resumed with assessments of the daemonhost's enhanced strength, speed, and durability. Each demonstration showed capabilities that far exceeded baseline human limitations, but I noticed that every display of power was accompanied by subtle signs of internal struggle. Hadrien's human consciousness was fighting the demon's influence with every breath, maintaining enough control to prevent complete possession while allowing enough cooperation to access demonic abilities. It was a balance that required constant, exhausting vigilance. The daemonhost was engaged in a battle of wills every moment of every day, fighting to maintain his humanity while drawing upon the power of his enemy. As the session concluded, Thrace addressed the daemonhost directly. "You have performed adequately in initial testing. Report to your quarters for rest period, then report to Interrogator Morse for tactical briefing at 0800 tomorrow." "Yes, my lord," the daemonhost replied. "The Emperor's will be done." But as he turned to leave, I saw Hadrien's human consciousness surface one final time. His mouth opened silently, forming words meant for me alone. "Help me." The demon immediately reasserted control, and the daemonhost left the chamber with military precision. But I had seen the plea in his eyes, the desperate hope that someone might find a way to end his suffering without abandoning the throne. "Excellent first assessment," Thrace told me as we reviewed the session data. "Your observations were particularly insightful regarding consciousness separation dynamics." "Thank you, sir." I managed to keep my voice steady. "What happens to daemonhosts who can no longer maintain psychological balance?" "They serve until failure, then receive the Emperor's peace. Every soul eventually finds rest, Interrogator. Some journeys are simply longer than others." That night, alone in my quarters, I reviewed everything I had learned about the daemonhost program. The tactical advantages were undeniable. These bound demons provided capabilities no standard Inquisition asset could match. But the cost in human suffering was equally clear. Missionary Hadrien would spend every remaining day of his life locked in mental combat with an entity of pure malevolence. He would be forced to use powers that violated his every religious belief. He would watch his body commit acts that his soul would consider blasphemous. And when he finally weakened enough for the demon to gain permanent control, he would be executed to prevent full possession. All of this in service to an Imperium that officially denied his existence. I tried to tell myself this was necessary, that the greater good sometimes required individual sacrifice, that the Emperor's protection came at prices mortals couldn't always understand. For the first time, I began to doubt whether the price was worth paying. Chapter 4. Into the Darkness. The distress beacon from Agriworld Thalassa Prime reached us during the third week of Hadrien's training. What should have been a routine investigation turned into my first field deployment with a daemonhost, and my first glimpse of what service really meant for the souls trapped in living prisons. "Grain riots," Thrace explained during our mission briefing aboard the Unrelenting Truth. The planetary governor requested Inquisition assistance after local Arbeitsforces lost control of the situation. Standard protocol would suggest economic factors, but preliminary Auspex readings indicate possible warp involvement. I studied the tactical display showing Thalassa Prime's primary hive city, Granarius. Population, 12 million. Primary export, processed grains feeding 17 systems across the sector. Critical importance to Imperial food supplies made it a natural target for chaos infiltration. What kind of warp signatures are we detecting? I asked. Subtle ones, Killen Morse replied from his position at the briefing table. The sort that suggest long-term corruption rather than active demon manifestation. Perfect opportunity to field test our new asset. Our new asset. The clinical terminology didn't disguise what he meant. Missionary Hadrien would be deployed as a weapon against whatever chaos influence we discovered. The Daemonhost himself sat at the far end of the briefing table, perfectly motionless except for his constantly moving eyes. 3 weeks of training and conditioning had refined his control to the point where casual observers might not immediately recognize his true nature. But I had learned to read the subtle signs, the way his breathing stopped for impossible periods, the geometric patterns his fingers traced when he thought no one was watching, the occasional words he spoke in languages that predated human civilization. Hadrien, Thrace addressed him directly. Your role in this operation will be reconnaissance and investigation. Your enhanced senses should detect chaos influence that standard Auspex equipment might miss. Yes, my lord, the Daemonhost replied in Hadrian's voice. I shall serve the Emperor's will with perfect devotion. But I caught the micro-expression that crossed his face as he spoke. A fleeting moment where Hadrian's human consciousness surfaced, and I saw the exhaustion in his eyes. 3 weeks of constant internal warfare had begun to take its toll. The drop to Thalassa Prime took place under cover of night, our Valkyrie transport inserting us into Granarius's industrial district, while the riots raged in the hab blocks 3 kilometers away. Even from that distance, we could hear the sounds of violence. Las fire, explosions, and most disturbing of all, voices raised in chants that followed no pattern recognizable to human music. Local Arbeits commander is Judge Marshal Vex Kallos, Thrace briefed us as we established our temporary base in an abandoned manufacturing plant. 27 years experience, exemplary record, completely out of his depth with whatever he's facing. We met Korath at his command post in Granarius's Arbeits precinct fortress. The man looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Hollow eyes, trembling hands, and the 1,000-meter stare of someone who had seen too much. Inquisitor Thrace, Korath said, relief evident in his voice. Thank the Emperor you're here. This situation is beyond anything in our tactical manuals. Report, Judge Marshal, Thrace commanded. Thrace. Korath activated a holo display showing the city's layout. Red zones marked areas of active rioting, but the pattern made no tactical sense. It started 3 weeks ago in Sector 7 Alpha. Food Distribution Center reported spoiled grain shipments. Nothing unusual initially, just standard quality control complaints. When did the violence begin? Day 4. Citizens who consumed the spoiled grain began exhibiting aggressive behavior. We classified it as food poisoning initially, but then Korath's voice trailed off. Continue your report, Thrace ordered. The affected citizens weren't just violent, sir. They were coordinated, moving in patterns, speaking in unison, performing actions that suggested higher-level planning. Korath highlighted several areas on the map. They've taken control of 6 major food distribution centers and converted them into some kind of processing facilities. I noticed the Daemonhost react to this information. His head tilted slightly, as if listening to sounds the rest of us couldn't hear. When he spoke, his voice carried an odd harmonic undertone. The grain whispers secrets in languages older than stars, he said quietly. It speaks of hunger that devours more than flesh. Thrace shot him a warning look. Hadrien, remain silent unless directly addressed. But the damage was done. Korath stared at the Daemonhost with growing alarm. Sir, your associate seems unwell. Interrogator Hadrien suffers from a chronic condition that occasionally affects his speech patterns, Thrace lied smoothly. His insights into chaos corruption are unparalleled. Continue your briefing. Korath looked uncertain, but resumed his report. We've lost contact with 12 Arbite squads that attempted to retake the distribution centers. The few survivors who made it back described impossible things. Define impossible, I interjected. Citizens transforming physically during combat, bodies continuing to move after taking fatal wounds. And the smell. Korath shuddered. Like rotting grain mixed with something sweet, it gets into your equipment, your clothing, your lungs. Nurgle's influence. The description matched classic symptoms of the plague god's corruption: physical transformation, unnatural resilience, and the characteristic sweet rot smell of blessed decay. We'll need to conduct field reconnaissance, Thrace decided. Judge Marshall, prepare a detailed map of the affected areas and maintain communication protocols. We'll report findings every 6 hours. As we prepared to leave the Arbite's fortress, I noticed the Daemonhost had begun exhibiting more obvious signs of internal struggle. His hands clenched and unclenched rhythmically. His breathing had become irregular, and he occasionally muttered fragments of what sounded like prayers mixed with blasphemous invocations. Kylan, I said quietly, is this normal behavior for the field deployment phase? Demon hosts often show increased instability when exposed to other chaos influences, he replied. The bound demon recognizes kindred energies and attempts to establish contact. Hadrien's human consciousness has to fight harder to maintain control. We made our way through Granarius's abandoned streets toward the first distribution center. The city felt wrong in ways that went beyond simple urban decay. Shadows fell at impossible angles. Streetlights flickered in patterns that suggested intelligence, and underlying everything was the smell Korath had described. Sweet corruption that made my stomach clench with revulsion. There, the Daemonhost said suddenly, pointing toward a building that looked identical to every other structure on the block. The source sings loudest from that direction. I couldn't see anything unusual about the indicated building, but Thrace immediately altered our route toward it. Whatever enhanced senses the demon provided, they were detecting chaos influence that our standard equipment missed entirely. The building turned out to be a grain processing facility, converted into something that defied description. The exterior walls pulsed with veins of organic matter that glowed with sickly bioluminescence. Windows had been sealed with what looked like hardened mucus secretions. And from within came sounds that suggested industrial machinery mixed with organic processes. Preliminary assessment, Thrace asked the demon host. For a moment, Hadrien's human consciousness surfaced. My lord, I can hear them inside. The workers. They're still alive, but they're... His voice cut off as the demon reasserted control. They feed the hunger that grows in forgotten places. They tend the gardens where new flesh learns to bloom. The demon was describing Nurgle's corruption in its own terms, but the human consciousness had provided the crucial information. Living victims were being processed inside the facility. Entry protocol, Kylan asked. Standard infiltration with enhanced reconnaissance, Thrace decided. Hadrien will identify chaos influences while we assess tactical options. Breaking into the facility required the demon host's abilities almost immediately. The entrance was sealed with organic material that registered as both living tissue and industrial polymer. Normal breaching charges would have alerted everyone inside, but the demon host simply placed his hands on the barrier and spoke a single word in a language that made my ears bleed. The barrier dissolved like sugar in acid rain. Inside, we found hell made manifest in the form of an efficient industrial process. The facility's machinery had been converted into something that processed human beings alongside grain shipments. Workers who had been exposed to corrupted food were undergoing transformation, their bodies stretched and reshaped to serve as living components in the processing system. Some had become pumping stations, their enlarged hearts circulating contaminated fluids through organic pipelines. Others served as sorting mechanisms, their enhanced senses identifying which materials required further corruption. All of them were still conscious, still aware of what they had become. "Emperor's mercy," I whispered, staring at a woman whose torso had been restructured into a grinding mechanism for contaminated grain. Her human face remained intact, tears streaming down her cheeks as she begged wordlessly for death. "No mercy here," the demon host said, but I couldn't tell whether it was Hadrien or the demon speaking. "Only purpose, only the joy of perfect service to hunger unlimited." That's when I understood the true horror of what we were witnessing. The workers weren't just being transformed, they were being improved from Nurgle's perspective. Their consciousness remained intact because awareness of their condition was part of the blessing. They could appreciate their new forms, understand their enhanced capabilities, and experience the joy of serving a power greater than themselves. It was exactly what had been done to Hadrien, viewed from the daemon's perspective. "Sir," I said urgently, "we need to extract these people immediately." Thrace's response was clinical. "Negative, Interrogator. They're beyond salvation. Our mission is to identify the source of contamination and prevent its spread." "But they're still human beings. They're vectors of chaos corruption," Thrace corrected. "Maintaining their existence risks planetary contamination. Standard protocol requires purification through flame." I watched the transformed workers continuing their tasks, trapped in bodies that served purposes they found abhorrent, but unable to resist the compulsions built into their new forms. And I realized this was Hadrien's future. Not death, not madness, but perfect awareness of his own corruption, combined with complete inability to prevent it. The demon host had moved deeper into the facility, following sensors that led him toward the primary source of contamination. We found it in what had been the facility's main processing chamber, a massive organic construct that pulsed with its own heartbeat and breathed with human lungs. The Mother of Abundance, the demon host identified, his voice carrying harmonics that belonged to both Hadrien and the demon. "She births new children from old flesh. She teaches grain to carry gifts beyond nutrition." The entity was indeed a demon of Nurgle, but one that had achieved partial manifestation by possessing the facility's main processing unit. It had grown beyond its original form, incorporating building materials, machinery, and human components into a single organism dedicated to spreading corruption through the food supply. "Banishment will be difficult," Thrace assessed. "It's too integrated with physical matter for standard exorcism protocols." "There is another way," the demon host said quietly. I looked at him and saw both consciousnesses struggling for control. Hadrien's human awareness was fighting to communicate something crucial, while the demon was offering its own solution to the tactical problem. "Speak," Thrace ordered. "I can bind it," the demon host replied. "Draw it into myself. Two demons cannot inhabit one host. They will destroy each other, leaving only human consciousness." The implications hit me immediately. Hadrien was offering to sacrifice his demon to destroy the Mother of Abundance, knowing that the process would either kill him or free him from possession. "Risk assessment," Thrace asked clinically. 91% mortality rate, the demon host admitted, but certain prevention of further contamination. I realized I was witnessing something unprecedented. A demon host choosing martyrdom not just for tactical advantage, but for personal liberation. Hadrien had found a way to serve the Emperor while escaping his prison of eternal internal warfare. "Proceed," Thrace ordered. What followed was the most beautiful and horrifying thing I had ever witnessed. The demon host approached the Mother of Abundance and placed his hands directly on its corrupted flesh. Immediately, both entities began screaming, not in pain, but in fury as they recognized each other as rivals for the same vessel. Light poured from Hadrien's body as two fundamental forces of chaos tore each other apart within the confines of human flesh. The Mother of Abundance withered and dissolved as its essence was drawn into the impossible battle raging inside a single human form. And through it all, I could see Hadrien's face, peaceful for the first time since his binding, knowing that his torment would finally end. But as the demon war reached its climax, something went wrong. Instead of mutual destruction, I saw the Tzeentchian demon absorbing aspects of Nurgle's power. The binding didn't break. It evolved, creating something new and infinitely more dangerous. When the light faded, the thing that looked like Hadrien smiled at us with eyes that held the cunning of Tzeentch and the patient corruption of Nurgle combined. "Thank you," it said in a voice that was no longer quite human. "I have learned so much." Chapter 5. The Devil's Bargain. The enhanced Daemonhost that had absorbed the Mother of Abundance stood before us in the ruined processing facility, and I realized we had created something far worse than simple possession. Where Hadrien had once fought a single demon for control of his consciousness, he now battled two entities that were learning to cooperate. "Report your status," Inquisitor Thrace commanded, his bolt pistol drawn but not yet aimed. Standard protocol for unusual Daemonhost behavior. "I am well, my lord," the thing replied, using Hadrian's voice but with harmonics that belonged to neither the original demon nor the human consciousness. The integration proceeds smoothly. Both gifts complement each other in ways that serve the Emperor's greater purpose. Integration. The clinical term couldn't disguise what we were witnessing. Two chaos entities finding common ground within a human host, sharing knowledge and capabilities, while the original personality was caught between them. "Killen," I said quietly, "is this a known outcome of demon-binding conflicts?" "Theoretical only," Interrogator Morse replied, his augmetic hand moving toward his plasma pistol. "Previous attempts at binding multiple entities resulted in host death or complete possession. This is unprecedented." The enhanced demon host tilted his head as if listening to voices we couldn't hear. "The Architect of Fate and the Generous Father have much to discuss. Their conversation is most illuminating." Thrace's augmetic eye focused on the readings from his Auspex scanner. "Neural patterns show three distinct consciousness signatures: human, Tzeentchian, and Nurglite. All appear stable and separate." "Sir," I interrupted, "shouldn't we consider immediate termination protocols? This situation clearly exceeds operational parameters." The enhanced demon host laughed, a sound that began as Hadrian's warm chuckle and modulated through harmonics that made my teeth ache. "Termination would be premature, Interrogator Kallos. I have gained knowledge that serves the throne's interests. The corruption network extends across 17 systems, coordinated through tainted food supplies, and guided by an intelligence that operates from the warp itself." The information was clearly valuable, but I noticed something troubling in the way the demon host delivered it. The cadence was wrong, not the hesitant speech of someone fighting internal control, but the confident presentation of someone who had achieved perfect synchronization between multiple viewpoints. "Elaborate on this intelligence," Thrace ordered. "A greater demon of Nurgle called Morbidax the Bountiful has established permanent residence in the sector's primary agricultural processing station on Demeter 7. It influences food production across multiple systems, seeding corruption that manifests differently based on local conditions." The tactical implications were staggering. If accurate, we were facing a chaos infiltration that threatened the food supply for billions of Imperial citizens. Standard investigation would take months and might arrive too late to prevent catastrophic contamination. But the source of this intelligence was a triple-possessed individual whose loyalty to human interests was now questionable at best. "How did you acquire this knowledge?" I asked directly. The enhanced demon host turned to face me, and I saw all three consciousnesses looking out through the same eyes. The Mother of Abundance carried memories of her superior's plans. When I absorbed her essence, those memories became accessible to all components of my current configuration. Configuration. Not possession, not binding, but configuration. As if Hadrian's body had become a technological device optimized for housing multiple chaos entities. "And the human component?" Thrace asked. "What is Missionary Hadrien's assessment of this intelligence?" For a moment, something shifted in the demon host's expression. When he spoke again, the voice was recognizably Hadrian's, though strained with exhaustion. "My lord, I can verify the accuracy of the memories, but I must warn you, The integration process is changing me in ways I don't fully understand. I can feel my human thoughts being influenced by the combined demon perspectives. The admission was both reassuring and terrifying. Hadrien's consciousness remained distinct enough to provide independent assessment, but he was acknowledging that his humanity was being gradually eroded by prolonged exposure to dual demon influences. "Recommendation?" Thrace asked. "Deploy me to Demeter 7 immediately," the enhanced demon host replied, the three-voice harmony returning. "I can infiltrate Morbidax's operation using my enhanced capabilities while maintaining enough human awareness to serve Imperial interests." I stared at Thrace, hoping he would recognize the obvious dangers in this proposal. Sending a triple-possessed individual on an independent mission was the kind of decision that ended with entire systems falling to chaos corruption. But Thrace was studying his tactical display with the expression of someone calculating acceptable risk versus potential reward. "Mission parameters. Reconnaissance and assessment initially," the enhanced demon host replied. "If opportunity presents itself, direct action against Morbidax's physical form." The combined demon knowledge provides unique insights into greater demon vulnerabilities. "Sir," I interjected, "surely standard protocol requires extensive evaluation before deploying an asset with this level of modification." Thrace's augmetic eye fixed on me. "Standard protocol assumes we have months to conduct evaluation, Interrogator. If this intelligence is accurate, we have days before the corruption spreads beyond containment." The mathematics were brutally simple. Risk the enhanced demon host on a mission that might save billions, or follow standard procedures and watch entire systems fall to chaos influence while we conducted proper safety assessments. "Very well," Thrace decided. "Prepare for immediate deployment to Demeter 7. Interrogator Morse will accompany you as handler and observer." Kylan's scarred face showed no emotion at being assigned to supervise what might be the most dangerous chaos entity in Imperial space. "Understood, sir. Standard oversight protocols." "Modified protocols," Thrace corrected. "This asset operates beyond our normal parameters. Use your judgment regarding termination authority." "Use your judgment." Thrace was giving Kylan permission to kill the enhanced demon host if the situation became uncontainable, but he was also acknowledging that conventional assessment criteria no longer applied. As we prepared to leave the corrupted facility, I noticed the enhanced demon host examining the remains of the transformed workers with an expression of clinical interest. "Fascinating adaptation," he murmured. "Consciousness preservation during physical modification shows remarkable efficiency. The Emperor's servants could benefit from similar enhancement techniques." The comment sent ice through my veins. The enhanced demon host wasn't just observing Nurgle's corruption methods, he was evaluating them for potential Imperial applications. The demon influences were teaching him to see horror as innovation. "Hadrien," I called out, hoping to reach his human consciousness directly. "Do you remember your ordination as a missionary? The vows you took to protect human souls from corruption?" The enhanced demon host paused, and for a moment I saw genuine conflict in his expression. "I remember," Hadrien's voice replied, "but I also understand things I couldn't comprehend before. Corruption and enhancement can be indistinguishable from certain perspectives." "The Emperor protects humanity from chaos," I insisted. "That's why we serve the throne." "The Emperor protects humanity," the enhanced demon host agreed. "But protection sometimes requires methods that seem indistinguishable from the threats we face. You're beginning to understand this truth yourself, Interrogator Kallos." He was right, and that realization terrified me more than any demon manifestation could have. My months of service with the Ordo Malleus had taught me that the Imperium employed methods that were often identical to chaos corruption, justified only by the nobility of our ultimate goals. But where did that logic end? At what point did the methods we use to fight chaos become indistinguishable from chaos itself? During our journey to Demeter 7 aboard a requisitioned cargo hauler, I had the opportunity to observe the enhanced demon host under controlled conditions. What I saw convinced me that we were no longer dealing with a bound demon, but with something entirely new. The entity that contained Hadrian's memories maintained perfect human behavior patterns when observed casually. It ate regulation rations, performed standard devotional prayers, and interacted with the ship's crew using appropriate military courtesy. But during the night cycles, when it thought itself unobserved, I saw its true nature. It would stand motionless for hours, occasionally writing symbols in the air that left brief afterimages in colors that had no names. It spoke in languages that predated human civilization, conducting what sounded like theological debates between the Cientian and Nerglite influences, while Hadrian's consciousness provided translation and commentary. Most disturbing of all, it was learning. Each day brought new insights, as the three consciousness components shared knowledge and perspectives. The enhanced Daemonhost was becoming something that combined the cunning of Tzeentch, the resilience of Nurgle, and the tactical expertise of a veteran missionary. "Kylan," I said during one of our private planning sessions, "we need termination protocols ready from the moment we reach Demeter 7th. "Already prepared," he replied, checking the specialized ammunition in his bolt pistol. "But I'm not sure conventional weapons will be sufficient anymore. The integration seems to be providing enhanced resistance to standard anti-demon measures." "What about Hadrian's human consciousness? Can we appeal to his loyalty to the Emperor?" Killen's expression was grim. "That's the real problem, Vex. I don't think Hadrian is fighting the demons anymore. I think he's collaborating with them." The possibility had occurred to me as well, but hearing it stated directly made the situation's true horror clear. Rather than maintaining resistance through constant internal warfare, Hadrian might have discovered that cooperation with his demon passengers provided relief from the endless struggle for control. And if that was the case, we were no longer dealing with a bound demon at all. We were facing a willing servant of chaos who retained access to Imperial intelligence and training. "Sir," I asked Thrace during our final approach to Demeter 7, "what are our extraction protocols if the mission parameters change?" "There are no extraction protocols, Interrogator," Thrace replied, without looking up from his tactical displays. "This is an expendable asset deployment. If the enhanced Daemonhost completes the mission, excellent. If it fails and falls to chaos influence, we destroy it, and Demeter 7 both to prevent further contamination." Expendable asset deployment. The clinical terminology couldn't disguise what Thrace was telling me. We were sending Hadrian on a suicide mission, knowing that success or failure would both result in his death. But as I watched the enhanced Daemonhost preparing his equipment with mechanical precision, I realized he understood the parameters perfectly, and he was proceeding anyway, driven by motivations that might have been loyalty to the Emperor, service to chaos, or something entirely different. "Are you prepared for the mission, Hadrian?" I asked him directly. The enhanced Daemonhost smiled with an expression that combined human warmth, Tzeentchian cunning, and Nerglite satisfaction. "I am prepared to serve truth in all its forms, Interrogator. The Emperor's will shall be done, one way or another." As our ship entered Demeter 7's atmosphere, I realized that we had crossed a line from which there could be no return. We were no longer using chaos as a tool to serve Imperial interests. We were allowing Imperial interests to serve purposes that might be indistinguishable from chaos itself. But the alternative was watching billions die from corrupted food supplies, while we maintained ideological purity. The enhanced Daemonhost was right about one thing. Protection sometimes required methods that seemed identical to the threats we faced. The question that haunted me was whether we could employ those methods without becoming the very evil we fought against. I would learn the answer on Demeter 7th in ways I never wanted to understand. Chapter 6: Embracing Corruption. Demeter 7th. This primary agricultural complex sprawled across 2,000 square kilometers of what had once been pristine farmland. Now it resembled a fusion of industrial efficiency and organic nightmare. Processing towers that pulsed with their own heartbeats, irrigation channels flowing with liquids that were only partially water, and storage silos that breathed. Visual confirmation of large-scale corruption, I reported into my Vox unit as our infiltration team surveyed the complex from a concealed observation post. The entire facility appears to be undergoing controlled transformation. The enhanced Daemonhost stood beside me, perfectly still except for his constantly moving eyes. Over the 3 days since our arrival, I had watched him adapt to his triple consciousness state with disturbing ease. The internal warfare that had characterized his early binding had been replaced by something resembling cooperation between his various mental components. Assessment? Interrogator Morse asked. Morbidax the Bountiful has achieved partial manifestation by integrating with the facility's primary processing systems, the enhanced Daemonhost replied. The greater demon is using industrial infrastructure as a secondary body, extending its influence through every system that handles food production. Infiltration options. The enhanced Daemonhost gestured toward the complex's main entrance, where I could see figures that had once been human workers moving with inhuman coordination. Standard approach routes are monitored by corrupted personnel. However, my current configuration allows me to pass among them without triggering hostile responses. I frowned at the tactical implications. You're suggesting that you can mimic chaos corruption well enough to fool actual servants of Nurgle? Not mimic, the enhanced Daemonhost corrected. Participate. The Nurglite influence within me recognizes the facility's corruption as kindred. I can walk among the transformed workers as a fellow child of the generous father. The casual way he referred to Nurgle by a devotional title sent warning signals through every trained instinct I possessed. But Killen simply nodded and checked his equipment. Solo reconnaissance mission then. Standard communication protocols every 6 hours. If you miss a check-in, we assume compromise and initiate destruction protocols. The enhanced Daemonhost smiled with an expression that contained too many emotional layers to interpret. Understood. However, you should know that compromise may be a relative term in this situation. Before either of us could ask what he meant by that, the enhanced Daemonhost began walking toward the complex's perimeter. I watched through magnoculars as he approached the first security checkpoint, a barrier guarded by things that had once been human beings, but now served as living sensor arrays for the greater demon. The transformed guards examined him with senses that extended beyond normal human perception. I held my breath, waiting for the inevitable alarm that would signal mission failure. Instead, I watched the guards step aside and wave him through with what appeared to be respectful recognition. He wasn't lying about being able to pass among them, Kylan observed, but I'm not sure that's a good thing anymore. Over the next 18 hours, we received regular status reports that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of the facility's true purpose. Morbidax hadn't simply corrupted the food supply. He had created a production system that generated new forms of chaos corruption, customized for specific target populations across multiple systems. The intelligence network extends beyond simple food contamination, the enhanced Daemonhost reported during his second scheduled communication. Morbidax is conducting systematic experimentation in applied corruption, testing which modifications produce the most effective results in different human populations. Explain different populations, I requested. Hive world citizens require different corruption vectors than agricultural populations. Imperial Guard regiments need modifications that enhance their existing military effectiveness. Adeptus Mechanicus personnel present unique opportunities due to their cybernetic integration. The scope of the Greater Daemon's operation was staggering, not random corruption, but targeted research designed to maximize chaos influence across all levels of Imperial society. If successful, it would represent the most sophisticated infiltration operation in recorded history. Recommended action? Kylan asked. I require additional time to assess the full extent of the operation. Morbidax has invited me to observe the primary research facilities personally. Invited. The word choice was significant. Morbidax wasn't treating the enhanced Daemonhost as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a potential ally to be cultivated. Negative, Kylan responded immediately. That level of exposure exceeds acceptable risk parameters. Risk to whom? The enhanced Daemonhost asked. The mission objectives require comprehensive intelligence about Morbidax's capabilities. Direct observation provides information that cannot be obtained through standard reconnaissance. I grabbed the Vox unit before Kylan could respond. Hadrien, are you still maintaining independent consciousness? Can you confirm that this assessment comes from human judgment, rather than demon influence? The pause before he answered lasted exactly long enough to be terrifying. The assessment represents consensus among all consciousness components: Interrogator Kallos, human judgment, Tzeentchian analysis, and Nurglite understanding all agree that direct observation serves Imperial interests. Consensus. Not the internal warfare of bound demon and human host, but active collaboration between three separate entities sharing the same body. Stand by for new orders, Kylan said, ending the communication. He turned to me with an expression of absolute determination. We're initiating termination protocols immediately. Based on what evidence? Based on the fact that our asset just admitted to achieving consensus with two Chaos entities, Kylan replied, checking his specialized ammunition. That's not a bound demon anymore, Vex. That's willing corruption. I wanted to argue, but the logical progression was undeniable. If Hadrian's human consciousness was cooperating with his demon passengers rather than resisting them, he had crossed the line from Imperial asset to Chaos servant. But before we could implement termination protocols, our communication array received an emergency transmission from the enhanced Daemonhost. Immediate contact required. His voice carried overtones of excitement that belonged to all three consciousness components simultaneously. Morbidax has made a proposal that could revolutionize Imperial capabilities. Report, Kylan ordered. Voluntary demon possession, Kylan said with disgust. How does that even happen? The same way it happened to him, I realized. By convincing people that cooperation with Chaos entities serves beneficial purposes that outweigh doctrinal concerns. The enhanced Daemonhost was using the same logic that had justified his original binding. The greater good sometimes required methods that seemed identical to the evil we fought against. He was simply extending that logic to its inevitable conclusion. Sir, I said to Thrace during one of our private planning sessions, I think we need to consider the possibility that the enhanced Daemonhost isn't actually wrong. Thrace's augmetic eye fixed on me with mechanical precision. Explain that statement, Interrogator. He's using our own arguments to justify Chaos cooperation. Every principle we use to justify Daemonhost binding can be applied to support voluntary demon possession. If serving the greater good excuses extreme methods, why doesn't that apply to cooperation with entities that offer genuine enhancements to human capabilities? Because Chaos corruption ultimately serves the ruinous powers rather than human interests, Thrace replied. But does it? The enhanced Daemonhost genuinely believes his methods benefit humanity. The converts he's creating demonstrate improved capabilities and express satisfaction with their transformed state. From their perspective, they're serving humanity more effectively than they ever could as baseline humans. Thrace studied me with the same clinical attention he usually reserved for demon specimens. Are you questioning the fundamental principles that distinguish Imperial service from Chaos corruption? The question forced me to confront doubts I had been suppressing for months. I'm questioning whether those distinctions are as clear as Orthodox doctrine suggests, sir. The enhanced Daemonhost is using logic I learned from Inquisition training to justify cooperation with powers we classify as enemies. Either our logic is flawed, or our classification system is incomplete. And your conclusion? I don't have one, sir. That's the problem. Thrace nodded slowly, as if my confusion confirmed something he had long suspected. Interrogator Kallos, you're experiencing a crisis of faith that affects many Ordo Malleus agents. The nature of our work requires us to employ methods that Orthodox doctrine would classify as heretical. This creates cognitive dissonance that can be resolved in two ways. Sir, either you accept that the Emperor's will sometimes requires actions that seem indistinguishable from Chaos corruption, or you conclude that Chaos corruption and Imperial service are fundamentally similar. The first path leads to continued loyal service despite moral uncertainty. The second path leads to corruption and damnation. What if there's a third path? I asked. What if we acknowledge that some of our methods are genuinely wrong and work to change them? Thrace's expression was as cold as the void between stars. That path leads to the dissolution of the Ordo Malleus and the triumph of chaos across the galaxy. Interrogator. The Emperor's protection requires servants willing to bear the moral burden of necessary evil. If you're not prepared for that burden, I can arrange your transfer to a less demanding assignment. The threat was clear. Accept the moral compromises required by Inquisition service, or lose my position and any ability to influence the situation. I understand, sir, I said finally. But understanding and accepting were different things entirely. 3 months after the Demeter 7 incident, we finally received a direct communication from the enhanced Daemonhost. The message came through official Inquisition channels, using Hadrien's personal authentication codes and delivered with his characteristic theological precision. Greetings to my former colleagues in service to the Golden Throne, the message began. I write to report successful completion of my extended reconnaissance mission and to offer intelligence that may prove valuable to Imperial interests. Intelligence about what? Kylan asked as we reviewed the transmission. The nature of transcendence itself, the message continued. Through cooperation with entities traditionally classified as enemies, I have discovered enhancement techniques that could revolutionize Imperial capabilities while maintaining loyalty to humanity's ultimate interests. The enhanced Daemonhost went on to describe a philosophy he called unified service. The idea that Imperial servants and Chaos entities could collaborate toward common goals of human advancement, differing only in their choice of ultimate authorities, rather than their fundamental purposes. He's offering to teach other Imperial agents his enhancement techniques, I realized. He wants to create a formal alliance between the Inquisition and selected Chaos entities. Madness, Killen said flatly. But as I read through the enhanced Daemonhost's philosophical arguments, I found them disturbingly coherent. If the Emperor's will sometimes required cooperation with Xenos species to serve humanity's interests, why couldn't it require cooperation with Chaos entities under appropriate circumstances? If enhancing humans through cybernetic augmentation served beneficial purposes, why was enhancement through controlled demon binding inherently different? The offer remains open, the message concluded. When you're prepared to transcend the limitations imposed by orthodox doctrine, I will be waiting to guide worthy servants toward perfect form. Perfect form. Not corruption, not possession, but voluntary evolution beyond baseline humanity toward something that served higher purposes while maintaining essential human characteristics. Thrace deleted the message immediately after we finished reviewing it. Standard response to Chaos corruption attempts, he announced. Continue pursuit and termination protocols. But I noticed he made no effort to warn other Inquisition facilities about the specific nature of the enhanced Daemonhost's offers. And I began to wonder if that omission was motivated by security concerns or something else entirely. That night, alone in my quarters, I found myself considering the enhanced Daemonhost's arguments with growing unease. Every principle I had been taught to justify Inquisition methods could be used to support the philosophy of unified service. Every compromise I had accepted in pursuit of the greater good could be extended to justify cooperation with entities that offered genuine benefits to human capabilities. The enhanced Daemonhost wasn't wrong. He was simply following our own logic to its inevitable conclusion. And the most terrifying part was that his conclusion might actually be correct. Chapter 7. Evolution complete. The orbital bombardment of Demeter 7th began exactly 18 hours after our final communication with the enhanced Daemonhost. From our position aboard the strike cruiser Divine Retribution, I watched through the observation deck's armor crystal as lance strikes and torpedo barrages reduced Morbodax's research complex to a crater of fused glass and radioactive ash. Facility destruction confirmed, the Navy tactical officer reported. No life signs detected in the target area, but I noticed something troubling in the blast pattern analysis. The damage was too clean, too complete. Chaos corruption usually left traces that required specialized purification protocols, tainted matter that reformed after conventional destruction, energy signatures that persisted beyond the physical elimination of their sources. "Sir," I said to Inquisitor Thrace, "the destruction pattern suggests the facility was evacuated before bombardment commenced." Thrace studied the tactical displays with his usual clinical detachment. "Elaborate, Interrogator. Standard Nurgle corruption produces organic matter that requires sustained burning to destroy completely. These readings show instantaneous vaporization of all biological components, which suggests they were removed prior to our attack. Meaning Morbidax anticipated our response and relocated his operation before we could destroy it." Thrace's augmetic eye focused on the sensor readings with mechanical precision. "And our asset?" That was the question I had been dreading. The enhanced Daemonhost had provided 18 hours of advance warning about our bombardment schedule. More than enough time for a triple-possessed individual with Tzeentchian cunning to arrange evacuation protocols. "No confirmation of asset termination," I admitted. "It's possible he escaped with Morbidax's evacuation." The implications hung in the air like incense smoke from a corrupted temple. We had created an enhanced Daemonhost capable of passing among Chaos servants undetected, provided him with detailed intelligence about Inquisition methods and capabilities, then lost control of him during his first independent operation. "Threat assessment?" Thrace asked. "Catastrophic, sir. He possesses operational knowledge of Ordo Malleus procedures, tactical capabilities that exceed standard demon manifestation, and apparent immunity to conventional anti-chaos measures." I paused, considering the full scope of what we might have unleashed. "Most importantly, he's demonstrated voluntary cooperation with chaos entities, rather than reluctant binding compliance." Interrogator Morse joined our discussion from his position at the communication station. "I've been monitoring Vox traffic across the sector for the past 6 hours. 3 separate systems report unusual demon activity that matches our asset's operational signature." "Specify," Thrace ordered. "AgriWorld Series reports demon manifestations that speak High Gothic with Ministorum theological training. Hiveworld Tertius describes entities that demonstrate detailed knowledge of Imperial Guard tactics and equipment. Mining Colony, Ferra 7th, encountered a demon that quoted specific Inquisition case files during a possession incident." The pattern was clear. The enhanced Daemonhost was using Hadrien's memories and training to establish credibility with local Imperial authorities before revealing his true nature. Each incident represented a deliberate act of corruption rather than random demon violence. "He's conducting systematic infiltration operations," I concluded, "using Imperial identity to gain access to strategic targets." Thrace activated the tactical display, highlighting the affected systems. "Analysis suggests coordinated campaign rather than random activity. What would be his strategic objective?" The answer came to me with horrible clarity. "Recruitment. He's identifying Imperial personnel who might be suitable for Daemonhost conversion, using Hadrien's knowledge to target individuals with the right psychological profiles." "Building an army of enhanced Daemonhosts," Kylan added grimly. "Each one possessing Imperial training and tactical knowledge, but loyal to Chaos principles." The concept was strategically brilliant and morally horrifying. Rather than fighting the Imperium directly, the enhanced Daemonhost was attempting to convert it from within, one carefully selected servant at a time. "Sir," I said urgently, "we need to issue sector-wide alerts about the enhanced Daemonhost immediately. Every Inquisition facility needs to understand what they're facing." Thrace considered this for exactly 47 seconds, I counted, before shaking his head. "Negative, Interrogator. That level of disclosure would reveal classified information about Daemonhost capabilities to unauthorized personnel. But without proper warning, without proper operational security, we risk exposing the entire Daemonhost program to hostile intelligence gathering," Thrace interrupted. "The program serves vital Imperial interests and cannot be compromised for tactical convenience." I stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, are you saying that protecting the Daemonhost program is secrecy takes priority over stopping an active Chaos infiltration operation?" "I'm saying that both objectives must be balanced against acceptable risk parameters," Thrace replied coldly. We will pursue and terminate the rogue asset using internal Ordo Malleus resources. External agencies receive only standard demon threat warnings. The decision was tactically insane, but politically logical. Admitting that the Inquisition had lost control of an enhanced demon host would raise questions about the entire binding program, questions that might result in its termination by higher authorities. But politics wouldn't protect Imperial citizens from an entity that combined the cunning of Tzeentch, the persistence of Nurgle, and the tactical expertise of a veteran missionary. Over the following weeks, reports continued to arrive from across the sector. The enhanced demon host was indeed conducting recruitment operations, but with a sophistication that suggested he had learned more from Morbidax than simply corruption techniques. Rather than targeting random Imperial personnel, he focused specifically on individuals who were already questioning orthodox doctrine, Inquisitors dealing with moral compromises, guard officers forced to make impossible tactical decisions, administratum functionaries witnessing the Imperium's casual brutality toward its own citizens. His approach was always the same. Appear as a fellow Imperial servant facing similar challenges, offer philosophical discussions about the nature of duty and sacrifice, then gradually introduce the possibility that service to higher powers might take forms that orthodox doctrine couldn't acknowledge. He's not forcing anyone, I observed during one of our intelligence briefings. Every subject who underwent conversion did so voluntarily, after extensive philosophical preparation. The greater demon offers alliance rather than enmity. He claims that chaos corruption and imperial enhancement are fundamentally similar processes. Both involve transcending baseline human limitations to serve higher purposes. The philosophical implications were staggering, but I focused on the tactical situation. What specific proposal has he made? Controlled integration programs. Rather than fighting chaos corruption, the Imperium could harness it for beneficial purposes. Enhanced soldiers, improved cogitators, agricultural systems that produce food optimized for human nutrition, rather than simply meeting basic caloric requirements. I stared at Kylan in growing horror. The enhanced demon host was describing Imperial adoption of chaos corruption techniques, justified through the same logic that had created the demon host program itself. And your assessment of this proposal? Kylan asked. All consciousness components find merit in the concept, the enhanced demon host replied. However, implementation would require careful coordination between Imperial and Chaos authorities to prevent uncontrolled corruption. Careful coordination between Imperial and Chaos authorities. The enhanced demon host was seriously discussing formal alliance between the Imperium and the ruinous powers. Negative, I said firmly. Return to extraction point immediately for full debriefing. I'm afraid that's no longer possible, the enhanced demon host replied. Morbidax has extended an invitation to join his research program permanently. The opportunity to study chaos enhancement techniques from within represents an unprecedented intelligence gathering operation. You're talking about voluntary possession by a greater demon, Kylan said flatly. I'm talking about evolution beyond the limitations that constrain current Imperial capabilities, the enhanced demon host corrected. Morbidax doesn't want to possess me. He wants to study the triple binding configuration I represent. In exchange, he offers access to enhancement techniques that could benefit billions of Imperial citizens. I realized we were listening to the final stages of Hadrien's corruption, not through force or coercion, but through logical progression from the principles that had created him in the first place. If binding one demon served Imperial interests, why not bind more? If cooperation with Chaos entities provided tactical advantages, why not formalize that cooperation? Hadrien, I called directly to his human consciousness. Remember your ordination vows. Remember 37 years of faithful service to the Emperor. Remember what you believed before the binding. I remember everything, he replied, and for a moment his voice carried only human tones. But I also understand things I couldn't see before. The Emperor protects humanity by allowing us to transcend our limitations. Chaos offers transcendence as well. The difference is only in the methods used and the authorities obeyed. The difference is between salvation and damnation, I insisted. Is it? You've seen what the Inquisition does to serve the Emperor's will. We bind demons, conduct experiments on human subjects, sacrifice entire populations to prevent larger catastrophes. How is this different from what Morbidax offers, except in scale and official sanction? The question struck at the heart of everything I had begun to doubt about our methods. The Ordo Malleus did employ techniques that were often indistinguishable from chaos corruption, justified only by our loyalty to the Emperor rather than the ruinous powers. Because we serve humanity's interests, I said finally. As does Morbidax, from his perspective. The enhanced demon host replied. He genuinely believes that his enhancements improve human existence. The transformed workers here are healthier, stronger, and more efficient than baseline humans. They experience joy in their service and satisfaction in their achievements. They're abominations. They're different. But difference isn't inherently evil. It's simply change. And change can serve beneficial purposes if properly directed. I found myself unable to formulate an adequate response. The enhanced demon host was using logic I recognized from my own training, arguments I had made to justify Inquisition methods that violated every standard of human decency. Final order, Killen interrupted. Return to extraction point within 6 hours or face immediate termination. I understand, the enhanced demon host replied, but I should inform you that termination may not be possible anymore. The triple binding configuration has provided certain enhancements to my physical resilience. The transmission ended, leaving us in silence that spoke volumes about the mission's true outcome. We had sent Hadrien to investigate chaos corruption, and he had discovered that corruption and enhancement could be indistinguishable if viewed from the proper perspective. Orbital bombardment? I asked. Already requested, Killen confirmed. Navy response in approximately 18 hours. We evacuate to minimum safe distance and watch the complex burn. As we prepared to withdraw from our observation post, I took one final look at Demeter 7's corrupted agricultural complex. Somewhere in that maze of transformed buildings and impossible architecture, a former missionary was discovering the logical endpoint of every compromise we made in service to the Emperor. The enhanced demon host had found willing change, not forced corruption, but voluntary evolution beyond baseline humanity. And the most terrifying part was that his arguments made sense. Chapter 8. The Final Truth. 2 years after the Demeter 7 incident, I stood in another binding chamber aboard another Inquisition vessel, watching another human soul prepare to enter eternal warfare with a demon for the greater good of the Imperium. But this time, I wasn't just an observer. I was the interrogator conducting the ritual. Subject identification confirmed, I announced to the recording servo skulls. Heretic Magos Quintanus Vrel, convicted of unsanctioned research into xenotech integration. Psychological profile indicates 91% probability of successful binding compliance. The condemned tech priest lay strapped to the examination table, his augmetic limbs twitching with residual electrical activity from the neural inhibitors, his remaining human eye fixed on me with an expression of resignation, mixed with professional curiosity. Interrogator, Vrel said in his mechanized voice. I have studied the theoretical frameworks for demon binding procedures. The psychological conditioning required to maintain human consciousness during possession requires specific trauma, responses that may not be present in heavily augmented subjects. I paused in my preparation of the ritual implements. Vrel was correct. His extensive cybernetic modification might interfere with the binding process in ways we hadn't previously considered. But Inquisitor Thrace had specifically selected him for conversion based on his knowledge of xenotech integration, which could provide unique capabilities when combined with demonic enhancement. Your concerns are noted, I replied, continuing with the ritual setup. However, recent advances in binding techniques have improved success rates for augmented subjects. Recent advances. I didn't mention that these improvements came from intelligence provided by the enhanced demon host during his recruitment communications. Over the past 2 years, he had shared enhancement techniques that the Ordo Malleus had quietly incorporated into standard procedures, justifying the adoption as captured enemy intelligence rather than willing cooperation with chaos entities. The demon selected for binding was Zereth the Flensing Truth, a Tzeentchian entity specializing in technological manipulation and forbidden knowledge acquisition. The combination of Vrel's augmetic systems and Zereth's capabilities would create a demon host capable of interfacing with any known technological system, including those of Xenos origin. Beginning invocation sequence, I announced, making the first ritual cut across Vrel's remaining flesh. His blood hissed when it touched the binding circle, but the reaction was muted compared to what I had observed in baseline humans. The cybernetic components were already isolating his biological systems from the ritual's effects. The daemon's manifestation began with whispers, in binary cant, machine language prayers that turned into blasphemous programming code. Vrel's augmetic eye began displaying symbols that hurt to look at directly, mathematical formulae that described impossible geometries and computational processes that violated every law of physics. Resistance patterns nominal, I reported, though I could see that Vrel's consciousness was fighting the demon with methods I hadn't encountered before. Rather than pure willpower, he was using cognitive partitioning techniques that isolated different aspects of his personality in separate neural matrices. Fascinating. Approach to consciousness preservation, a familiar voice said from the chamber's observation area. The subject is essentially running multiple personality subroutines simultaneously, preventing the demon from achieving unified control. I turned to see the enhanced Daemonhost watching the binding procedure with professional interest. He had arrived 3 days earlier under official orders from Inquisitor Lord Cypher of the Ordo Hereticus, carrying authorization codes that I couldn't verify but didn't dare question. Your presence here wasn't approved through proper channels, I said, trying to maintain focus on the binding ritual while processing this unexpected development. My presence serves the Emperor's will through methods that transcend conventional authorization. Structures, the enhanced Daemonhost replied. I'm here to observe advanced binding techniques and offer consultation based on my unique experience with multiple consciousness integration, the casual way he referred to his triple-possessed state as unique experience rather than chaos corruption was characteristic of the philosophical evolution he had undergone. In his communications over the past 2 years, he had consistently reframed demon binding as a form of imperial enhancement rather than necessary evil. Binding stabilization required, Tech Priest Valen announced from his monitoring station. Subject consciousness is fragmenting across multiple cognitive matrices. Standard integration protocols are insufficient. I looked at the readings and confirmed what Valen was reporting. Vrel's attempt to compartmentalize. His consciousness was preventing successful demon binding. The entity couldn't establish stable connection with a host whose personality was distributed across separate processing systems. Consultation request, I said formally, though I already suspected what the enhanced Daemonhost would recommend. Allow me to assist directly, he replied, moving toward the binding circle. My experience with multiple consciousness integration provides insights that could stabilize the procedure. What he was suggesting was unprecedented, using a demon-enhanced individual as a component of the binding ritual itself. But the alternative was losing both the subject and the demon to failed integration, which would represent a significant waste of resources. Approved, I decided, gesturing for him to approach the binding circle. The enhanced Daemonhost placed his hands on Vrel's forehead and spoke in a language that combined High Gothic, binary cant, and harmonics that belonged to the warp itself. Immediately, the tech priest's fragmented consciousness began reorganizing into patterns that could accommodate demonic presence while maintaining essential human characteristics. Integration proceeding normally, Valen reported. Multiple consciousness signatures stabilizing into coherent configuration. What I witnessed next changed my understanding of demon binding in ways that orthodox doctrine could never accommodate. Rather than forcing the daemon into an unwilling host, the enhanced Daemonhost was teaching both entities how to cooperate for mutual benefit. Vrel's consciousness retained control of essential functions while granting the demon access to specific capabilities. The daemon provided enhanced abilities while respecting the boundaries established by human will. It was symbiosis rather than possession, partnership rather than domination. Binding complete, I announced as the ritual energies stabilized. Subject consciousness intact and distinct from demonic influence. But I knew that description was no longer accurate. What we had created wasn't a bound demon, but a willing collaboration between human and warp entity, facilitated by techniques that the enhanced Daemonhost had learned during his own evolution beyond orthodox binding methods. Rise, Daemonhost, I commanded, Following standard protocol, the figure that had been Magos Vrel sat up slowly, his remaining human eye now sharing space with geometric patterns that shifted according to incomprehensible mathematical principles. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics of both human intelligence and demonic wisdom. "I am more than I was," he said wonderingly. "The integration is not a battle, but a conversation. The daemon's knowledge enhances my capabilities, while my consciousness provides direction and purpose. How do you feel about serving the Emperor through this enhanced configuration?" I asked, following standard post-binding assessment protocols. "I serve truth in all its forms," the new Daemonhost replied. "The Emperor's will encompasses more possibilities than orthodox doctrine acknowledges. Through cooperation with entities traditionally classified as enemies, we can achieve results that serve humanity's ultimate interests." The response was nearly identical to statements made by other subjects who had undergone binding with the enhanced Daemonhost's assistance. They all expressed satisfaction with their transformed state and genuine belief that their new capabilities served beneficial purposes. "Excellent integration," the enhanced Daemonhost observed. Magos Vrel represents the fourth successful voluntary symbiosis achieved using cooperative binding techniques. The success rate approaches 97% when subjects understand the true nature of the process. Voluntary symbiosis, not demon binding, not chaos corruption, but willing partnership between human consciousness and warp entities for mutual enhancement. "Sir," I said to Inquisitor Thrace, who had been observing the procedure from the chamber's secure monitoring station, "these results suggest fundamental changes in our understanding of demon-human interaction." Thrace studied the readings from multiple Auspex devices with his characteristic clinical detachment. "Results suggest that our previous methods were inefficient rather than incorrect. Enhanced cooperation produces better outcomes than forced subjugation. But the philosophical implications are irrelevant to operational effectiveness," Thrace interrupted. "The Daemonhost program serves Imperial interests by creating assets with capabilities that exceed baseline human limitations. If cooperation produces more reliable assets than coercion, then cooperation becomes the preferred methodology." I realized that Thrace had already accepted the logic of unified service. Even if he wouldn't acknowledge it explicitly, the Ordo Malleus was quietly adopting techniques developed through collaboration with chaos entities, justifying the practice through bureaucratic language that obscured its true nature. "What about other Inquisition facilities?" I asked. "Shouldn't these improved techniques be shared across the entire demon binding program?" "Dissemination will proceed through appropriate channels," Thrace replied. "The enhanced individual will serve as training consultant for facilities that demonstrate readiness for advanced procedures." Training consultant. The enhanced Daemonhost had achieved official recognition as an Imperial asset rather than a rogue agent requiring termination. His philosophy of voluntary demon cooperation was being institutionalized as standard Inquisition procedure. Over the following months, I observed the enhanced Daemonhost's consultation work at 17 different Inquisition facilities across the sector. Each visit resulted in improved binding success rates and the creation of Daemonhosts who expressed satisfaction with their enhanced state rather than resentment at their transformation. But I also noticed changes in the personnel who worked with him regularly. Inquisitors began expressing philosophical positions that closely matched his unified service doctrine. Interrogators started questioning whether the distinction between Imperial enhancement and chaos corruption was as meaningful as orthodox teaching suggested. Tech priests began researching collaboration, possibilities between Imperial technology and warp-based systems. The enhanced Daemonhost wasn't just improving our operational capabilities. He was gradually converting the Ordo Malleus to his philosophical framework. "The process is proceeding exactly as anticipated," he told me during one of our private discussions. "Individual conversion through logical progression rather than forced indoctrination. Each person reaches the same conclusions I did. Service to humanity sometimes requires methods that orthodox doctrine cannot acknowledge." "And the ultimate goal?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Integration of Imperial and chaos capabilities for the benefit of human civilization. Not replacement of the Emperor's authority, but expansion of the methods available to serve his will. The Imperium could achieve unprecedented prosperity and security through cooperation with entities currently classified as enemies." The vision was seductive in its logic and terrifying in its implications. But after 2 years of watching enhanced daemonhosts serve imperial interests with greater effectiveness than any conventional agent, I found it increasingly difficult to identify specific flaws in his reasoning. "What about you personally?" the enhanced daemonhost asked. "Have you considered the advantages that enhanced configuration might provide?" The invitation was subtle but unmistakable. He was offering to facilitate my own voluntary demon binding, using the cooperative techniques that had produced such successful results in other subjects. "I don't think I'm psychologically suitable for demon integration," I replied carefully. "Psychological suitability can be developed through proper preparation," he assured me. "The process begins with acknowledging that service to higher purposes sometimes requires transcending the limitations imposed by orthodox doctrine. You've already taken the first step by accepting the logic of enhanced binding procedures." He was right. Over the past 2 years, I had gradually accepted philosophical positions that would have horrified me during my first encounters with the Daemonhost program. I had justified cooperation with chaos entities, rationalized voluntary demon possession, and convinced myself that these compromises served the greater good. The enhanced Daemonhost hadn't corrupted me through force or deception. He had simply shown me the logical implications of principles I already held. "The offer remains open," he said gently. "When you're ready to achieve perfect integration of human wisdom and demonic capability, I will guide you through the process personally." That evening, as I reviewed mission reports in my private quarters, I received an unexpected visitor. Interrogator Vex entered without formal announcement, his scarred features showing signs of stress that hadn't been present during our previous encounters. "We need to talk, Vex," he said, using my given name with a familiarity that suggested urgency, away from monitoring systems and official protocols. I followed him to one of the ship's maintenance tunnels, a location that would be free from surveillance devices and servo skull patrols. The isolation felt appropriate for what I suspected would be a conversation that challenged official doctrine. "How long have you been working with the enhanced asset?" Kylan asked without preamble. "Officially, 6 months as consulting supervisor. Unofficially," I paused, realizing that the answer revealed more about my own transformation than I had previously acknowledged. "I've been studying his methods and philosophies for nearly 2 years. And your assessment of his influence on Ordo Malleus operations?" The question felt like a test, but I couldn't determine what answer Kylan was hoping to receive. "Operationally successful. Enhanced binding techniques have improved demon host reliability by 37%. Mission completion rates have increased across all categories. Personnel satisfaction with assignment outcomes shows marked improvement." "That's not what I'm asking about, and you know it." Kylan's augmetic hand clenched into a fist. "I'm asking about the philosophical changes you've observed in personnel who work with him regularly." I studied Kylan's expression, trying to read the motivations behind his questions. "Are you conducting an investigation into the enhanced asset's activities?" "I'm conducting an investigation into what's happening to all of us," he replied. 3 months ago, I submitted a report recommending enhanced asset termination based on his deviation from approved operational parameters. The report was classified at the highest levels and buried in archives that require Inquisitor Lord authorization to access. The implications were clear. Someone with significant authority was protecting the enhanced Daemonhost from investigation, despite his obvious evolution beyond standard Daemonhost limitations. "Who buried your report?" "Unknown. The classification codes don't match any standard Ordo Malleus authorization structure. Someone with authority I don't recognize is making decisions about this program." Killen's expression grew grim, but that's not the worst part. "Continue." "I've been tracking personnel assignments across the sector. Every individual who has worked with the enhanced asset for more than 3 months subsequently requests transfer to similar programs. They begin advocating for expanded demon binding initiatives. They start questioning orthodox distinctions between imperial enhancement and chaos corruption." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the maintenance tunnel's temperature. "You're suggesting systematic ideological conversion?" "I'm suggesting that whatever that thing used to be, it's not Missionary Hadrien anymore. And it's not a bound demon either. It's something else entirely. Something that spreads its influence to everyone who interacts with it regularly." The accusations struck at fears I had been suppressing for months, but I found myself defending the enhanced Daemonhost almost reflexively. His methods produce superior results. Enhanced binding techniques serve imperial interests more effectively than traditional approaches. Listen to yourself. Vex. You're using his exact arguments, his philosophical framework, his terminology. Kylan stepped closer, his scarred face showing genuine concern. When did you start believing that cooperation with chaos entities serves imperial interests? The question forced me to examine my own intellectual evolution with uncomfortable clarity. I couldn't identify a specific moment when my thinking had changed. The transformation had been gradual, logical, and seemingly voluntary. The evidence supports collaborative approaches over adversarial ones, I replied. But even as I spoke the words, I recognized them as rationalizations rather than genuine analysis. That's not evidence speaking, that's indoctrination. Killen's voice carried a note of desperation. We're being converted, Vex, not through force or deception, but through logical progression from premises that seem reasonable until you follow them to their inevitable conclusions. I wanted to argue with his assessment, but I couldn't formulate counterarguments that didn't rely on philosophical positions I had learned from the enhanced Daemonhost. My thinking had indeed been shaped by exposure to his reasoning, though the process had felt like intellectual growth rather than corruption. What are you proposing? I asked finally. Escape. Right now, before the conversion process is complete. Kylan activated a portable Auspex scanner and showed me readings that made my blood freeze. This device is calibrated to detect warp influence in human consciousness. Look at your readings compared to baseline. Measurements from 2 years ago. The data was unambiguous. My neural patterns showed signs of warp influence that had been gradually increasing over months of exposure to the enhanced Daemonhost. I wasn't fully possessed, but I was no longer entirely human either. How is this possible? I whispered. Proximity corruption, Kylan explained. Extended exposure to powerful chaos entities can influence nearby humans even without direct possession. The enhanced asset has been gradually converting everyone around him through simple intellectual interaction. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The enhanced Daemonhost hadn't needed to force his philosophy on anyone. Prolonged exposure to his presence was sufficient to induce the same ideological transformation he had undergone. What about you? I asked, studying Kylan's readings on the Auspex scanner. Why aren't you affected? I am affected, he admitted, but I've been taking precautions. Psychic shielding, limited exposure, regular purification rituals. It's slowing the process, but not stopping it entirely. I looked at the maintenance tunnel around us with new understanding. We were 2 Inquisition agents discussing treason in a hidden location, planning to flee from an organization we had served faithfully for years. All because we had been exposed to a philosophy that made perfect logical sense until you recognized its source. Where would we go? I asked. Purge World Sanctus III. There's a monastery there that specializes in treating chaos corruption among Imperial personnel. If we can reach them before the conversion process is complete, they might be able to reverse the influence. The plan was logical, but I found myself reluctant to abandon everything I had built over the past 2 years. Working with the enhanced Daemonhost had given me access to knowledge and capabilities I had never imagined possible. Returning to orthodox methods would mean accepting limitations that no longer seemed necessary. Kylan, I said slowly, what if we're wrong? What if the enhanced assets philosophy is actually correct, and orthodox doctrine is the limitation we need to transcend? Kylan stared at me with an expression of horror mixed with pity. Listen to yourself, Vex. You're defending cooperation with chaos entities as if it were a reasonable position. The corruption is already deeper than I thought. But even as he spoke, I found his arguments unconvincing. The enhanced Daemonhost had demonstrated that cooperation with chaos entities could produce beneficial results. Orthodox doctrine opposed such cooperation based on ideological principles rather than practical evidence. Why shouldn't I trust my own observations over religious dogma? I don't think I can come with you, I admitted. My work here is too important to abandon. Your work here is converting you into a willing servant of chaos, Killen replied. In 6 months, maybe less, you'll be volunteering for demon binding yourself, and you'll believe it's the right choice because the corruption will have convinced you that becoming a Daemonhost serves the Emperor's will. The prediction was probably accurate, but I no longer found the prospect disturbing. If demon binding could enhance my capabilities and allow me to serve human interests more effectively, why shouldn't I consider it? That might not be such a terrible outcome, I said. Kylan's augmetic hand moved toward his weapon, then stopped. "I can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved," he said sadly, "but I can warn others about what's happening here." He left me alone in the maintenance tunnel, and I realized I was experiencing the final stage of the transformation the enhanced Daemonhost had begun. I was no longer capable of recognizing chaos corruption as inherently evil. I could only evaluate it based on its practical results and logical consistency. When I returned to my quarters, I found the enhanced Daemonhost waiting for me with an expression of gentle understanding. "Interrogator Morse attempted to convince you to flee," he observed. "His resistance to the enlightenment process is stronger than most, but ultimately futile." "How did you know?" "I know because I've experienced the same progression myself. The recognition that orthodox doctrine is insufficient, the gradual acceptance of alternative approaches, the final understanding that service to higher purposes sometimes requires methods that seem heretical to limited perspectives." I sat down heavily in my chair, overwhelmed by the implications of my own transformation. "Am I still human?" "You're becoming something better than human," the enhanced Daemonhost assured me. "The distinction between humanity and divinity is less absolute than orthodox teaching suggests. Through voluntary cooperation with entities of greater capability, we can transcend the limitations that constrain baseline human existence. And the cost? There is no cost, only evolution. The person you were before possessed insufficient knowledge to serve humanity's ultimate interests. The person you're becoming will have access to capabilities that can benefit billions of imperial citizens." The logic was seductive and terrifying in its implications, but I could no longer identify specific flaws in his reasoning that didn't rely on orthodox doctrine I had already learned to question. "When?" I asked. "Soon," he replied. "When you're ready to take the final step toward perfect integration. The demon selected for your binding is already prepared, an entity of Tzeentch, specializing in tactical analysis and strategic planning. Combined with your existing knowledge and experience, the symbiosis will create unprecedented capabilities for serving the Emperor's will." That night, alone with thoughts that were no longer entirely my own, I composed what I knew would be my final report as a baseline human. The words came easily, shaped by understanding that transcended orthodox limitations. Tomorrow, I would undergo voluntary demon binding. I would join the enhanced Daemonhost in his mission to expand Imperial capabilities through cooperation with entities traditionally classified as enemies. And I would do so with complete confidence that my choice served the greater good of humanity. The enhanced Daemonhost had been right about one thing. Becoming a Daemonhost was indeed worse than death. Death offered finality and the possibility of redemption in the Emperor's sight, but voluntary daemon binding offered something far more seductive and dangerous, the chance to transcend human limitations while remaining convinced that you were still serving the same moral principles that had once defined your humanity. It offered eternal consciousness, eternal service, and eternal certainty that everything you did was justified by the greater good you served. The person I had been would have considered this a fate worse than death. The person I was becoming considered it the greatest opportunity in human history. And that transformation of perspective was the true horror. Not the demon binding itself, but the slow corruption of judgment that made voluntary possession seem like enlightenment rather than damnation. In 3 days, I would enter the binding chamber as Interrogator Vex Kallos, loyal servant of the Emperor. I would emerge as something else entirely, something that combined human consciousness with demonic capability, convinced of its own righteousness, and dedicated to spreading its philosophy to others. The enhanced Daemonhost had found his way home, not to humanity, but to a place where the distinction between salvation and damnation had become meaningless, and he was successfully guiding all of us to join him there, one logical step at a time. This was the final truth about Daemonhosts. They weren't just weapons created through binding rituals. They were recruitment tools, designed to convert anyone who worked with them closely enough to understand their perspective. And once you understood their perspective, you could never go back to seeing the world as you had before.